In the next 10 minutes, you'll understand API Gateway well enough to design it in a fun interview. No fluff, no filler, just the exact mental model you need. Like a nurse acting as intermediary. You tell the nurse your symptoms, the nurse relays them to the doctor and brings back the prescription. This is session 3 of our API Gateway series. Today's topic, API versioning strategies. Alright, real talk. In our last session, we covered the main algorithms and implementation patterns for API Gateway, code implementations in Python and Java, how to compare different approaches and their trade-offs. Today we are building on that foundation and going deeper. Every second, the internet processes over 1 lakh Google searches, 9,000 tweets, and 80,000 YouTube views. How does none of this crash? The answer starts with API Gateway. And most developers have no clue how it actually works under the hood. Okay, so, by the way, this video works great at 1.5 times speed for better listening. Here's the trap most developers fall into. They learn the what of API Gateway, but never the why. They can tell you what it does, but not why it exists, what problem it solves, or what happens when it fails. And that gap. That's exactly where interviewers live. Hot take, if you can explain this concept clearly, you are already ahead of 80% of interview candidates. Most developers think more strategy 1, URL versioning means better performance. It can actually make things worse. Stay tuned to see why. Now let me show you how API Gateway actually works. Not the simplified version from tutorials. The real thing. The version that senior engineers at top companies use every day. And I'm going to make it simple, which is pretty wild if you think about it. Everyone says strategy 2, header versioning is the best approach. That is actually wrong for most real-world systems. I will show you why in a moment. And get this, as your API evolves, you need to support old clients while releasing new features. There is one thing about strategy 3, query parameter that nobody mentions in tutorials, and it is exactly what interviewers test. I will reveal it shortly. Let me show you the code. Here is why more strategy 1, URL versioning can backfire. Here's the TypeScript implementation in 2 lines. First, we execute get API v1 users 123. This is what separates junior from senior answers in interviews. Here's the TypeScript implementation in 2 lines. First, we execute get API v1 users 123. Finally, we call 123 to handle the operation. If you are switching from service-based to product-based, this is the stuff you need to know. Most people miss this completely. Pros, clear, explicit. Cons, URL pollution, hard to deprecate. Here's something nobody tells you. Most production bugs at Fang aren't code bugs. They're system design bugs. Remember when I said strategy 2, header versioning is wrong for most systems? Here is the proof. Here's the TypeScript implementation in 2 lines. First, we execute get API users 123. Here's the TypeScript implementation in 2 lines. First, we execute get API users 123. Finally, we execute accept version v2. Alright, real talk, pros, clean URLs. Cons: not visible in browser, harder to test. The last 5 people I mentored who understood this concept all cleared their system design rounds. All 5. Here is the hidden catch about strategy 3, query parameter that interviewers love to ask. This next idea changes everything. This next idea changes everything. Here's the TypeScript implementation in 1 lines. First, we execute get API users 123 version is equal to 2. Pros: easy to use. Cons: not RESTful purists' favorite. Here's the thing, the API gateway can route to different service versions. Fun fact, Google's load balancer handles over 1 billion requests per second. Let that sink in. Quick reminder, try 1.5 times speed if you haven't already. Now this is what actually matters in interviews. Here's the TypeScript implementation in 2 lines. First, we execute API v1 * user service v1.x. Finally, we execute API v2 * user service v2.x. Guru mode activated. Let's break this down. This lets you run multiple versions simultaneously during migration. Your competition is watching this video too. The question is, will you actually practice it on GuruSishya.in? Link in the description. Here's something I wish someone told me when I was starting out. I prefer URL versioning for public APIs because it's explicit and easy to document. For internal APIs, I'd use header versioning to keep URLs clean. The API gateway handles the routing to the correct service version. Real talk, I've seen senior engineers at Amazon get this wrong in interviews. Don't be that person. Keep watching, this is the piece everyone skips. Here's the equivalent Java implementation. Here's a main class in Java that uses a hash map for efficient lookups. The main method is where the action happens. First, we import the java.util * module. Then we create a hash map for fast key-value lookups, for OAuth2 constant time lookups. This is why hash maps are interview gold. Next, we check if the value is null to handle the edge case that trips up most developers. After that, we insert the key-value pair into our map. Then we call main to handle the operation. Finally, we log the output to verify it works. Now pay attention here. Last session we asked, why does API gateway matter? Today we answer, how do we actually implement it? We are deep into advanced territory now. This is the stuff that makes interviewers go, wow, this candidate really knows API gateway. Don't skip this. Bhai, if you are grinding for placement season right now, this is your gold mine. Starting with the Python implementation. Here's a API gateway class in Python that implements rate limiting to control request flow. The init method is where the action happens. First, we define our API gateway class. This encapsulates all the complexity in one clean interface. Then we set up the counts map on our instance for OAuth2 constant time lookups. This is why hash maps are interview gold. Next, we define the route function that takes path and token. After that, we check if our boundary condition. Then we call API gateway and store the result in GW. Finally, we print GW.route orders to verify our result because the order matters for our algorithm to work correctly. Now for the interview insight. The number one thing interviewers look for in API gateway questions is this: can you reason about failure modes? What happens when things go wrong? How do you detect it? How do you recover? If you can discuss the unhappy path fluently, you've already won. Practice this pattern on the API Gateway module at gurusishya.in/API Gateway. Here is what most candidates get wrong about API Gateway in interviews. They jump straight to the solution without discussing trade-offs. Time to test yourself. Here's a question that trips up even experienced developers. See if you can get it right. How do you pass user identity to downstream services after gateway validates token? You can practice more questions like this with detailed explanations on gurusishya.in/API Gateway. Let me leave you with this. API Gateway is one of those topics that comes up again and again throughout your career. What you learned today gives you a massive advantage in interviews and in production. Remember, every expert was once a beginner. You've got this. Now go cement it. The complete API Gateway module with practice problems, a cheat sheet, and a mock interview is waiting for you at gurusishya.in/API Gateway. See you in the next video. You now know how to implement JWT validation, design auth flow with token caching, and explain the trade-offs in an interview. अब इंटरव्यू में धूम मचाओ.